I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Paul Gioupis, founder and CEO of Zeem Solutions. On today's episode, Paul and I will discuss the future of commercial fleet electrification and EV charging infrastructure. We hope you enjoy this episode. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Grayson.
It's great to have you here. Zeem's doing big things as the world transitions to electric. There's a thing called the infrastructure that you need to build, and you've built a very successful business model. You're conducting over 900 charging sessions a day. That's impressive. What goes into that from a logistical perspective?
There's quite a bit. First of all, to get started, you got to build these depots and you got to make sure you're doing them right and you're thoughtful from the beginning of a lot of activity coming in and out. So ingress and egress would be number one. Number two, you got to get customers to make sure that they show up and that they actually are interested in using your services. And then, of course, once you get through those, the idea is making sure that you have a good idea of scheduling. When you have customers that want to come in and charge, they typically give you what those charging schedules look like. It will run the gamut. You'll get some fleets that operate super early in the morning and want to make sure they're fully charged and out the door. Many want to charge throughout the day. And then many will do that sort of late night charging. So we want to make sure that we're flexible and we can account for all of those different types of applications. And we operate out of LAX with 20 different customers right now out of that site. So those 900 vehicles would comprise of 20 different customers. So it's interesting when you deal with a rideshare vehicle, a car rental, all the way up to a tractor and a bus and everything in between. So we've been solving that problem now for a good 3 years.
When you have customers that you mentioned charge at night, I'm the weird guy that study utility rates, and sometimes on non-peak hours are cheaper. Do you have certain customers that want to charge overnight because the utility rates are less than they are during the day?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. What happens is a lot of the fleets aren't aware of the time of use that's out there, unless they drive a Tesla and they have their personal vehicle charging that they do at home. But no, what happens, everybody comes in and says, I want to pay the least amount to charge, right? So we then start to explain to them time of use and explaining that the overnight charging and parking is a benefit. And that's why we suggest charging and parking as one of our offerings.
When they charge and park, do you also do maintenance? Because some of these vehicles do have maintenance issues from time to time, perhaps the PSI and the tires. Do you do all that as well?
Yeah, we very much offer that as a service. A lot of times fleets will say in the beginning, we don't really need that service. But what happens is they find very quickly that you want to make sure that you have a vehicle inspection that's occurring. You want to make sure that general maintenance is being done on these vehicles. And inevitably, it's a new technology. So what happens is drivers will come in with sometimes, silly questions. For somebody who's never driven an EV, it's not a silly question. For guys like us, we understand, like, this is how you turn on the windshield wipers. I know that may sound odd, but for anybody who's never driven a Tesla, that's actually a mystery. And so it's those kinds of things, just making sure that you're there 24/7, 365 to answer a lot of those questions. And frankly, that's what keeps everybody comfortable and coming back.
How do you design it from a design perspective? You have the rideshare vehicles, you have the Class 6 trucks, you have the Class 8, then you have the buses, different sizes, different power, and obviously some need a wider turn and lesser turn. How do you design that from a design perspective?
It's a really good question. Right now what we're finding is when we first designed these, we were trying to come up with a design that would be fairly generic and would cover everything from passenger vehicles all the way up to big buses that are 40, 45 foot. And then again, everything in between. What we found is that the design that we did out of LAX is great because it accommodates all of the above. You're going to get different traffic out of an airport location than, let's say, a port location. So what we've learned is out of our airport location, you want to design a certain part of your site to accommodate cars. You want to make sure you design another portion of the site to accommodate larger vehicles. I say larger because tractors and buses, buses could go up to as much as 40 to 45 feet. That's a lot of real estate to have to cover. So you want to make sure you're designing the site or that particular spot that when you pull in, the charge port will reach. You're not interfering with any other ingress, egress for any other vehicles coming in and out. And of course, to make sure you're operating safely. So what we've learned is the very first designs were, we didn't know what we didn't know yet. And we know that an airport design is going to be a bit different. Again, accommodate everything from a car all the way up to a big bus. The good news is at the port, you're typically going to get tractors. And the tractors are generally the same size as a bobtail. And then if you were to add the tractor on the back, or the trailer rather, that obviously adds another 40 to as much as 53 feet. So we want to make sure that we're accommodating those types of operators at the port. So look at an airport design, very different than a port design, but it's not rocket science. A lot of it is just making sure you're thoughtful of the operations on a day-to-day basis and operating safely.
At the port, is that mostly drayage just because the miles limitations that the electric tractors currently have today?
Yeah, it is. What we find is there's a very large portion of operators that do drayage runs. They're running 200, 300 miles a day or less. A lot of times we associate EVs with those longer range trucks. We just simply shouldn't do that. It's not the right application. So what's good is when you start looking at that shorter haul, it's about 30% of the market that we find. When you start going into the dense cities like New York, LA, San Francisco, it's a higher number. But if you were to look nationwide, and so what happens is that's a huge marketplace. So what we find is that not every truck is able to meet that duty cycle. Today, we run a lot of Volvo and Daimler and Nikola trucks. Nikola's got the best range so far, but you take away from payload, having more batteries on there. We've been enjoying seeing a lot of the improvements occur with the Volvo trucks. So Volvo's been, a really good performer, but we're seeing a lot of new product that's supposed to hit the market with much better range, better efficiency. So we're looking forward to seeing improved product over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months.
Do you see the battery chemistry getting better so the range and eventually gets extended? And when the range does, do you see it perhaps going from Port of San Pedro to Barstow and maybe perhaps making it to Las Vegas?
I think it's a dangerous thought today. Like technology on the battery is getting much better. But I think the moment we try to squeeze a battery solution into that type of a duty cycle, we're asking for disaster, if you ask me. To me, again, there's very fixed routes that fit EV trucks, and I think the more we try to stretch that technology, the more we're destined for failure. So I very much look at other technologies like diesel. Diesel is still a really good solution. You're going to get good efficiency. There's still good emission standards that are being driven by those OEMs. I think hydrogen is going to have a spot in this discussion. But I think whenever I talk about battery electric to any of our fleets, I tell them today it's got to be 200 miles or less. As the technology gets better, we may be able to stretch that to 300. I love to see what Tesla and others that are rivaling Tesla are doing. But I think the limit, in my opinion, is going to be 400 miles. Let me put it this way. I wouldn't want to contract a customer who's doing a 500-mile route every day, even if it were Tesla. I'd want to make sure we get a good 2, 3, 4 years of operation before I would commit to a customer that we could deliver that. So I think my answer will always be this market is 200 miles or less. And the next year as battery technology gets better, that'll probably stretch to 350, maybe 400. Beyond that, we shouldn't be talking about battery electric trucks for at least the next 3 to 5 years until we get some new technology that comes in to prove me wrong.
You're right about the outlook. Do you test the Volvos, the Daimlers, the Nikolas, or the Nikola Hyla brand before you recommend it to your customers? So if you go to the Google term, eat your own dog food, you actually understand the product?
Very much. I mean, my time is getting a bit stretched these days, but very much in the beginning, I drove every single vehicle we have in our fleet for at least 5,000 miles. Now, I don't enjoy a Class 8 driver's license, so I've been limited to test tracks on the Class 8. The good news is I get a really good feel on the drivetrains and how these vehicles operate from actually operating them myself. I think that's critical. So the answer is yeah. I mean, I would hate to recommend a vehicle for somebody for 3 to 5 years if I've never operated it or don't have deep knowledge around that vehicle. I think that's the key of what makes Zeem successful. Every single vehicle that contracts out of our location has to come in and be tested to make sure that that vehicle will charge. If it doesn't charge, they're going to have a really bad experience right from the beginning. So you have to know the vehicle, you have to know the chargers. You need to make sure that you're very confident in any product that you're going to put at your lot for the next 3, 5, 10 years. So very much critical about the equipment.
Do you finance the vehicles? Because you keep mentioning the 3 to 5 years. Is that there's a vehicle living on Zeem's balance sheet and then you're leasing it out to your customers as part of an all-inclusive package?
It depends on the customer's credit worthiness, but in many cases, yes. What's happened is many of the customers want to remove the technology risk. So what they do is they ask us to finance the truck provide all the infrastructure, and then even operate that asset at a satellite location, which is why our mixed fleet depot, being at the airport, being at the port, being at the distribution centers, makes sense. It's because there is no fleet that should go all in right now. The technology is just not ready. So what they're doing is following the mandates, knowing that they want to go in this direction, but right now, cost, infrastructure, the customer not willing to pay for it because everybody says they want it, but the customer has to pay for it. And if the customer doesn't pay for it, it doesn't work throughout the entire ecosystem. And I think that's what's key. I know everybody loves to have a good, cleaner environment. We all want to breathe cleaner air. But if we're not willing to pay for it, then we need to make sure we get technology to get competitive to the diesel pricing. And the good news is that's happening, right? It's just not happening fast enough. And it's happening, in other countries faster than it's happening here. So being an American and a proud patriot, I want to bang the tables here in the United States and say, come on, let's get that goal, that old American ingenuity and innovation going, and let's go out there and compete. And ironically, we are, right? We have Tesla, who is the 800-pound gorilla in this entire industry, but they're just moving at snail's pace for guys like us. So the faster they move, the faster the United States goes into number one place nationwide, or I should say worldwide, in electric trucks.
Where would we be if Elon never took the reins of Tesla, never accelerated the industry? Would we even be having this conversation today?
Not even close. Electric cars would not be where they are. He was an anomaly, flat out. We all know exactly what happened in the beginning. I mean, in my previous life, I wasn't always a EV infrastructure guy. In my previous life, I punished myself being an investment banker, and I owned a lot of Tesla stock when it first went public. And it was a very, very misunderstood company. For those who were really deep into the EV market back then, Tesla was a sub $1 billion market cap. In fact, I remember getting a presentation from Tesla at our offices when the market cap was about $300 million. So you can only imagine where the stock is today. So seeing that, what they did is they changed the opinion of anybody out there about electric vehicles. They were able to produce a phenomenal product at a price point that's competitive to petrol. And I think it's a misunderstood company. Everybody looks at Ford and Chevy and others and say, look, the EV market isn't there. I look at it a very different way and say, you just can't build an EV at the price point and the quality that Tesla is. So again, major patriot. And I go back to the innovation and, what America used to do and what they need to start to do in this industry is innovate. Let's go out there and learn from companies like Tesla, because it's amazing what he did. And you got to take things like X and the political environment out of it. Realize that the technology and the leap forward is significant, and the transfer that now to commercial vehicles, it's really a good thing. It should be politicized. It should be celebrated, and it's happened right here in America, right? So it's odd for somebody like myself sitting in this industry to say we need to search for this technology when it's actually sitting right here.
It is. The two things. I recently bought a Tesla from the other car that I had, and the whole experience is night and day. If you take that user experience and you put that on a Class 8, I think from a job perspective, people, oh, this is interesting. I get to drive a Tesla semi. You could see a really big uptake there. The other thing Tesla did brilliantly is the charging network. They work, going from the Electrify America and all the other brands that have all the issues, they don't work. How do you hedge the hardware risk in your business? Because sometimes the ABB doesn't work, the Hitachi doesn't work, and you can insert any brand here. How do you hedge that risk?
I think it's such an important question, right? First of all, I want to make sure that I'm dealing with the best of the best that's out there. We enjoy a really, really great relationship with ABB. I think the key is understanding there's a huge shift that's going on right now in the charging industry. Whether it's, switching over to NACS, whether it's the Tesla network that has been amazing charging experience. Zeem wants to replicate that for commercial fleet. So how do you do that? To me, what Tesla was great at was understanding where the customer was going to be in the first several years, where they were going to want to travel, and making sure that the infrastructure is at those important points. That's exactly what Zeem is doing, right? So to me, when you see the rest of the industry sort of following this freight corridor all across the country, I don't see the need to go from El Paso to San Francisco in an electric truck. It's nonsensical to a guy like myself. Just get in a diesel, make the route. You're going to do it a lot easier. It's going to save money. The consumer's not going to get more of a price point because they're operating in an electric truck. I think it's, just making sure that you're very, very close with all the hardware providers because this is going to commoditize. It's not rocket science building chargers. And what's going to happen now is everybody's going to try to get faster. Everybody's going to try to get more efficient. So I see a huge evolution that's going to happen in the EV charging world. I think public charging is going to be, it's going to have a history. I think that a lot of it is flawed, right? And when it comes to fleet charging, I think there's a big problem. So my answer always is, get integrated with the charger companies. And why I really love ABB is because, first of all, we commission our own chargers, we repair our own chargers. We enjoy that relationship with ABB because we're 24/7, 365. I don't want to rely on a third party. What Zeem has done in the entire industry is we've looked at charging and said, okay, where are the problems? We looked at the vehicles. Where are the problems? A lot of it is pretty obvious. I need spare parts. I need somebody to repair this piece of equipment. And what's happened is these third parties have really enjoyed the opportunity to make lots of money. So whether you're going out there and identifying incentives, if you're doing the install, if you're doing charger management, what happens is you have all these middlemen that are involved. So Zeem has simply just cut them all out, realized that we know the ecosystem well. So it starts with that charger, starts with the vehicle. If both of those pieces don't work together, Zeem doesn't have a business. So that's why I'm out there banging the tables on all the charger companies and the OEMs to say, innovate, improve, get better. And our business model, frankly, helps those companies. We help ABB show a significant uptime. We show Volvo great results and better range and better performance because we're handling the vehicle the way that it should be handled.
How long does a charger typically last? Have you seen any of the data? Because when we talked last, you put these chargers through the rigmarole. You pushed them to the limit. Do you see any data that you've seen that how long that they typically last?
It's a really good question. It's a really, really good question, Grayson, that people need to stop, pause, and think for a moment. Number one, a level 2 chargers will go for a while. As long as you do your general maintenance, I don't see why a level 2 charger couldn't last you 7 to 10 years, even if you're using it, very, very actively. DC fast chargers are a bit different, right? There's a number of different factors that go into stressing a charger. So for example, if you're using a 180 kilowatt charger and you're trying to pull 250 kilowatts out of that charger, you're pulling max load and you're really putting a lot of pressure on the power electronics. If you're using a 180 kilowatt charger and you're pushing 150, that's a really healthy environment for that charger. So I'd start off there by saying if you're overpowering that charger, you're going to stress it, you're going to get a lower life. I know that charger companies would like to advertise that it's a sort of 7-year to 10-year product. If you're not using it that much, maybe. Public chargers, I think we've seen that they last a bit less, but that's because they're treated horribly. And when you have different human interaction that occurs on those chargers, you get different problems and pain points. What's good with Zeem is that we handhold all of our equipment. We care about the vehicles, we care about the batteries in the vehicles, the chargers. So what we believe, and we look at a life cycle of anywhere between 3 to 5 years. Again, as I mentioned to you, 900 charge cycles is a lot. So each port that we have will do 10 to 15 charges in a day. So when you start thinking about that activity, and then what does that do to a regular user? It's hard, right? So for us, what's great and what I love with ABB again is they see the usage and realize, like any other customer in the field, we'd need 6 or 7 years of activity. I mean, we just crossed in 18 or 19 months, we just crossed 110,000 charge sessions at a Zeem, right? So that's a lot. And what'll happen very often, people will come to me and say, why do you buy ABB? Well, 110,000 charge sessions. Look, that's a lot of proof. As you could imagine, if we stumble in a day, 900 charge sessions is a lot. That'll help make me lose sleep, right? I want to make sure that those customers get out the door. So I think the long-winded answer is better know your charger companies, have a good relationship, get educated on how to repair those and have spare parts. And in my opinion, expect a life cycle of 3 to 5 years if you're going to be super active and you're super taking care and maintaining those chargers.
Are there certain components that you've noticed that have to be replaced more than others? Perhaps it's a heat shield or something else in there that has to be replaced more often?
Really good question. So number one, why Zeem is really efficient and good is because we don't use any sort of card readers or payment systems. So number one, that's going to be the major problem. And what's good is I don't have that problem, right? But I know that that's a major problem that's in the field. Number two, the screens just go bad. We sit in California, so what's great is, you love being in the sun, but the bottom line is being in the sun as a charger isn't great 24/7, 365. So what happens is the interfaces just start to go bad. They don't love that weather. So what we're finding is putting some sort of a shield or some sort of tent is super helpful. If you don't have cord management, we put it on right from the beginning. If you don't have cord management, very, very quickly, you start to see lots of problems with the cords. And then, of course, if you have other interaction besides, like our team is very well trained on how to use the equipment. If you put anybody else on a charge port and they start dropping it and getting upset because it's not plugging in right away, that's another major problem. You get some cracks, any breaks on the port itself. That's always the biggest issue that we see. And that's the number one thing we keep stocked. Our team, if a port breaks, our team who plugs and unplugs vehicles, these are hourly workers out of our depot, know how to repair that kind of stuff. So we make sure that we train our employees for this kind of operation. So if the vehicle won't start, they need to be able to diagnose that from a high level. Same thing from the charger. If the charger doesn't operate, they need to be able to diagnose that from a high level. That's the new hybrid worker that Zeem has been breeding and continuing to train, because that's what's going to be needed at US Foods, Pepsi, et cetera. When they're trying to figure out this operation, you need somebody who's electrically skilled to get into the switchgear panel and a lot of the utility gear down to the charger. And most importantly, do all that safely. You don't want anybody in there that's going to get killed or be at any sort of risk. So for us, it's making sure you're training that new future worker in what we do.
You're right. It's going to create jobs. Did you build your own software platform to manage this whole process?
I tried to build Zeem from the beginning without trying to build much of anything, except for the depots. I know it sounds strange. I didn't want to build the truck. I didn't want to build the charger. I didn't want to build the charger management because I knew people were far smarter at doing this. So what we did is we tested a bunch of different charger management software. We had a great group that I've publicly put out there multiple times called FlipTurn. Young group. I really appreciate entrepreneurship. And I had Katie and Sashko, who are the two founders, come in from Stripe, from Geotab, with really understanding how to solve this problem. And what I love is getting a vendor or a partner who walks in the door and says, let me solve your problems. What are your biggest pain points? I gave my top pain points, and within weeks, they came back and put together this magic recipe that we now enjoy today as our charger management software. And we've continued to invest all of our time and effort into them further developing for us. We do the same thing on vehicle platform. We're doing the same thing right now with ABB. The way that I see it, Grayson, is many do not have the knowledge yet because they haven't been there, pushing volume and doing stuff. So now that we are, what happens is many of those charger management competitors will come to us and say, we could do the same thing, just give me those ingredients in a good 6 to 12 months. And what happens is this just happened to be the group that was last to market, coming in, trying to build a product from ground up and just nailed the fleet market, right? Because the fleet market is just being developed. So what's been great is working with third parties like FlipTurn, working with ABB's team. These are some of the smartest people on the planet doing this stuff, working with the OEMs. As you know, we're working with worldwide OEMs right now, and being able to see what the mentality is and how they think and how they're trying to integrate right down to the operator. I think that's going to be key. And then, of course, everything will go autonomous. So everything we're building today, we're keeping in mind that eventually it's going to be driverless, and making sure that we're as safe as possible and that we're behind the fence and really thinking very thoughtfully about how these fleets will look in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now.
The fleets change. The biggest facing fleets right now is the change from the J plug to the NAX plug. Can you just replace that cord, or do you have to rip out that entire charger and replace it? What does that process look like?
It's a really good question. We're going through that exactly right now. What's happening is there is a cost to upgrading the cable. So the NAX cables right now, we use CCS1 on all of our DC fast chargers. ABB has their own upgrade, which we're installing as we speak, right? So there's been a decent cost, I could say that, in upgrading those cables. But we charge a lot of Teslas. We do a lot of rideshare vehicles. And then I know the Tesla Semi is going to have a different port. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're flexible. So today we use a lot of adapters that are coming off the CCS1. The efficiency has gotten better over the last 3 years. The first ones were terrible. Some of the intermediary ones were okay. Now they've gotten a lot better. So we're almost getting full power flow. But it's definitely important for us to make sure that we have NACS cables on our ABB chargers, and ABB has been great in making sure that happens. So I think others are going to be going through the same exact process, but we're very cognizant of that shift happening.
Does NACS unlock anything from a data perspective for you? Are you able to get more data off the vehicle that you can put into your flip turn system to optimize your operations?
That's a good question. The answer is no, but what it does do is it communicates far better with the Tesla. Let me tell you this. If you bring in a Tesla and try to charge it with an adapter on CCS1, you're not getting the data that you really want. That NACS does pull a lot more, Grayson, than I would like to be able to dump into flip turn. So today we are sort of closed out of a little bit of the data, but flip turn has been amazing in understanding what is important for Zeem. What's important for Zeem is I want to go back to the customer and tell them what they could be doing better to stretch their range, to spend less money, and to really make it more efficient for them. But the truth is there's a huge data scrape that needs to be done with Zeem. At 900 charge sessions a day, you can only imagine everything from scheduling to charge curves to everything, what is really needed. And what I love is that we're catcher's mitt for a lot of that stuff. So the same way I told you that I don't want to build the charger or a vehicle or charging management software, I'd like to go to those who are super smart, who could compile this data and come up with a better offering, and know that Zeem is we're the ones that are holding all that data and information. So I want to turn around and not offer it as a service, but turn around and make sure I improve our offering, be able to have better, more productive discussions with gentlemen like yourself, who has an audience that wants to understand more. Because right now, that's a really good question. What Tesla has done is amazing for EVs, plus their charging. And we need to do the same thing and replicate it for fleet. And I'm just telling you right now, nobody has that kind of innovation. And I really look forward to Tesla disrupting the semi market and then hopefully bringing the same type of innovation you see now. Everybody's rushing out to put an EV, despite the headwinds, right? But now you need to do that with commercial vehicles. And I'm very excited to see where that goes. Trucks are simpler than cars. So I think that we really need to be innovating there a lot more.
The trucks are simple because you also have the fleet managers that understand this, that you can have a real honest conversation with. Right now you have 2 sites at LAX, 5 sites are coming online. The curiosity in me says, how and where are you getting all this power? Where's that power coming from?
It's really difficult to identify it. There's a lot of competition right now for power, but what we've done is in the locations that we're going into, before we even announce that we're going into Savannah or SeaTac, we need to make sure that we've already secured the power. So what we do is we do an application, we go ahead, we secure it. We were very fortunate in all of these areas that there was power available. Let's say the 2 that I would point out would be Savannah and SeaTac, because those are not what I'm about to explain to you. That is a different moat for Zeem, which is that we're building at power plants. So those we got lucky. Right now on the power plant side, our investor, our main investor today is called ArcLight Capital Partners. ArcLight buys power plants, and they buy decommissioning power plants across the country. So for the last 2.5 years, we've enjoyed working with ArcLight and using their resources to understand, like, how would you take a existing power plant and turn it into like an EV charging hub for fleets? And how would you also do things like battery storage and other things that are very meaningful that will contribute to the future of transportation? So it's not just EV, it's also looking at things like hydrogen and how to use power at these sites. So what's happened is we've, for example, Long Beach, 15 megawatts coming straight right at a power plant. It is the largest interconnection in Long Beach. We just did our groundbreaking last Monday, and was great to have the mayor and the Port of Long Beach and everybody out there. This is a historical site. We're taking an old, 100-year-old plus power plant. The entire facility has sunk 20 feet over the last 100 years because they've just been pumping oil out of that facility and using that to power part of Southern California. They then shut that plant down and then refired it back up as a natural gas facility, but only as a peaker. And then now they're going to actually shut that site down and looking to completely decommission it by 2030. And what will happen is you'll have a Zeem EV charging hub there and a huge battery storage facility. So what happens is, you're now looking at what the future looks like. We're doing the same thing in Newark, New Jersey. And with Newark, Also super interesting, taking PSE&G, which is a fully decommissioned site. So they've already shut this thing down. And then we took an old transformer and asked PSE&G if we could re-energize it. And they agreed. And what's happened is we have a 33 megawatt interconnection there. And as you can imagine, as you know, finding 3 megawatts somewhere is exciting, never mind 33. And what's great is if you start thinking about like Tesla's, each of their superchargers are 750 kW. So to try to put a meaningful amount, aggregate 10 of them or 20 of them together, very, very difficult. What's great about Newark as well, 33 megawatts today with the ability to ramp that transformer up to about 80 megawatts. So that's how we're thinking about the world, Grayson, and so a lot of the sites that we have are going to be at power plants. And then we're also making sure that we're at locations that already have huge amount of power available.
When does nuclear enter the picture? We saw 3 Mile Islands coming back online because of Microsoft. When does nuclear enter the equation for Zeem?
It would be great if it was there today. Like France today is a great example of, 70+% of their power coming from nuclear. They're just killing it on the EV side, right? I mean, they just have EVs everywhere. And the cost of operating those EVs are phenomenal. It's clean energy. I think there's just a misperception. I think back to what happened in Japan, and everybody just immediately says, oh, well, that's what's going to happen here. I think there's an education that needs to happen. There is a significant amount of improvement in the technology. It is safer. I would love to see nuclear facilities come on because this power issue is going to continue to be here for decades. We don't have, even if today we agreed that we're going to move forward on nuclear power plants, we've got still a decade or so before those will actually be built and be able to provide the power needed. Where my mind goes to, and I know this may come across a bit George Jetson, is, we have some of the pioneers for bidirectional charging as part of our team. And so the way that I look at it is if you were to look at our Long Beach facility at 15 megawatts or Newark at 33, if we could connect, let's call it 100 trucks with a 700 kilowatt hour battery, that's 70 megawatt hours of power that's available sitting in our vehicles. How could we be good citizens of the grid, right? And I think a lot of that is making sure that we take that bidirectional piece and we push it back to the grid in times of stress. I think we need to do that with, very quick software tools that can integrate very quickly with utility. So what happens is, yes, we're going to be huge power draws, but the battery power that's sitting in our vehicles could be utilized to help buffer these loads and to help the grid resiliency that's going to need to be out there. So we're very thoughtful, and it is real, the amount of power and the draw and the stress it puts on the grid, but it's also very real that bidirectional charging does solve a lot of that problem. We're not talking about full discharge of the battery. You're talking about at certain times when that pressure point is there, taking 15-second intervals and just popping back some of that battery power to buffer those loads and keep stabilizing the amount of the power draws that are coming. So I look at us at a 10 megawatt draw, 15 megawatt of 33, and saying we could be really helpful citizens of the grid, and we're always going to be mindful of that. Our Zeem is about EV trucking. It's about charging, but it's also about distributed energy down the road and being mindful of how to play with the power markets safely, responsibly, but also lower the cost for the truckers that are operating that equipment. I don't want to ingratiate ourselves and make huge profits knowing that we're using that battery power for our own pockets. I want to pass it along and scale that across the country. That then has a huge impact on the transportation industry.
It has a big impact on the consumer. The cost of goods go down, and unfortunately, I believe it, October 1st, we're going to see that port strike, and that's going to get scary because inflation is going to ramp up. Prices are going to ramp up. It's interesting. The bidirectional charging, to me, putting on, since you have ArcLight as your investor, says, okay, wait, Zeem could become a power company. And then the other part of me says, wait a second, regulation. Are there any regulatory issues where you're controlling this vast amount of power that you have to prepare for now?
Big time. What we have found is there are several regulatory bodies that I've never heard of ever before until I started getting into the utility space. And yeah, it's very, very highly regulated, and it should be, frankly. What's happened is an example, we have a fully decommissioned site out of Newark. We are not connecting to a power plant. What ends up happening, a lot of people, and it's my fault, I get excited about talking about this, and the immediate thought is, oh, you're connecting to that power plant that's being decommissioned as a natural gas facility to do EV charging. That's not a win-win. That's a lose-win, right? At the end of the day, we're not doing that. We're actually taking a fully decommissioned site that's already offline. And we're doing a brand new interconnection right into that transformer from the grid. So we're doing that as well in Long Beach. Right now, what's going to happen and what we think is super interesting about Zeem is that we have been working with FERC and the ISOs and the other regulatory bodies here to explain how we could be operating safely out of these environments, what kind of impact it would have for the EV industry, specifically for commercial fleets, if you were able to tap into this power. And I think that what is happening is there's an understanding that's coming around. I'm not saying they're fully on board. It takes time. This is 2.5 years now of Zeem working on this. So it's not a new thought, but you can see the very first two locations have been announced. We've been doing intense work on, a little bit more than a dozen more to do the same exact thing. So it's very cumbersome, highly regulated, but we've been making sure we've been very thoughtful about how to navigate through that. That's part of the special sauce that Zeem has.
When you're bringing on these, let's call them power sites, and I'm going to put my telco hat on here. When you're running fiber to a business, you know this from your IB days, you need multiple forms of redundancy, because if you're trading and your fiber line goes down, you're in deep doo-doo. Your business, if power goes down, you're in deep doo-doo. Do you run multiple redundancy lines coming, say, one from the north, one from the south, coming in, or perhaps coming from a secondary source of energy?
It's a good question, and I wish I could tell you yes, right? Here's where I'm at. We end up, if we can, right, in New Jersey, we're able to do this. We have a direct line coming into that transformer that I've mentioned, that's a 110 megawatt transformer, but we're also sitting at a former utility site. So there is a utility switch yard right there. So we're going to have two connections. So we make sure that we have those two connections in place. And right now, Long Beach, we're exposed, right? If it goes down, we go down. Now, we know that battery storage is going to very much play a part. We just don't know exactly how much yet. What I'm worried about, and again, being a former investment banker, I'm very conscious of not overspending. So everybody will come and try to sell us a battery that needs to be on site. And I clearly know we need a battery, but I also know that that cost of that battery is exorbitant. What I want to do is exactly what you said earlier, pass along savings to the transportation operator so they could lower our cost. The more that we keep ingratiating ourselves, it goes the other way. So I think that's a good example of having to make sure that you're thoughtful of how much battery storage should you put on a site? How do you subsidize that battery storage? And we're looking at things that not only fixed storage, Grayson, but mobile storage. So very much looking at batteries to do backup out of our sites. The question mark I still have today, even though we're operate 900 charge sessions every day, we still don't really know how much storage we really need. That number is a moving target. So until I know that number and I can turn around to smart investors and make sure I could bank on that, it's always going to be a question mark.
It comes down to the data, and at some point you'll get that data as you see how the business evolves. You bring more sites on, we start to get into the teens. Over the next decade, how do you see the charging market evolving?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see what goes on. Look at this whole idea that EV is a fad. It's not, right? It's staying. So what's going to happen is I think a lot of us who drive an EV and go home every day, that's going to be the right solution. There's some problems for those who live in apartment buildings and multi-unit dwellings, et cetera. Those will start to resolve itself. What I think you're going to start to see is super high charging capacity, so the ability to charge faster. I think that we're moving way too slow there, but I think that's going to be a major thing you're going to start to see. And then I think you're going to see the ability to move electrons a lot easier. I think mobile charging is going to become very, very prevalent going forward, especially for fleets. The same way a fleet will, park 100 trucks and a diesel tanker will come in and fuel up those vehicles at night. I think you're going to start to see some solutions that are like that. And then I also think you're going to, see chargers evolve, especially with the DC. You're going to see more DC to DC converters that are going to be substituting a charger. The problem is you have AC power coming off the grid. So some of that stuff, I think you're going to see a really interesting, and I don't know what it looks like yet, but you're going to see something from that AC to DC that I think is going to be super innovative and lower big time the cost of the hardware itself, make it more efficient. I think that is going to be an interesting innovation that I think we're going to see coming. And then I think inductive charging. Inductive has always had, it's such an intriguing technology. It works, it's very little human interaction. The maintenance on it's good. The problem is the onboard. So to actually test it and say, could this work for me? Somebody's got to spend that money. And, Zeem very frequently gets approached to say, shouldn't you do this? You're at the airport, you have shuttles, you have trucks. The answer is, yeah, of course, but Zeem is not going to flip the bill to put a $10,000 or $15,000 board charger to prove inductive charging. So I think inductive, there's going to be some sort of tech, in my opinion, that's going to see that evolve very quickly. So I think that's where I think the state of charging will go. It's going to go towards exactly what you see with us, depot based. I think you're going to see charging at home improve significantly. And then I think you're going to see public charging probably not disappear, but certainly lessen a lot more than what we see today.
On the inductive side, in the Tesla's latest software update for the vehicle, it's written in there for inductive, and the Smart Summit. I'll leave the Elon analogy out of it. If you look at that, that could change the whole market. That's actually an SAE standard that Tesla's worked on. And then if you look at mobile charging, you're right. I'm really curious about this. Gene Simmons gave a talk about this in an offhand remark. He said, well, if I'm up there playing rock and roll and the fireworks can't go off, and because you got to charge your car, we've got a problem because I got to put the show on. Does that open for mobile charging at large concerts, at large events? We have 20, 30,000 people, perhaps bring in mobile charging so Gene Simmons can play rock and roll all night?
You've nailed it. I mean, the bottom line is if you could provide megawatts at a concert event or a carnival, why can't we do that on a temporary basis for vehicle fleets? So it's taking that same concept, Grayson. I enjoy having some super smart people on our team. So the gentleman who invented the AC propulsion motors on our team, he invented regen. He also invented bidirectional charging with our friends over at Nuvi. So I asked him his single innovation that I've asked him to work on here, and we're going to reveal it pretty soon. I'll make sure you're one of the first to see this, is how do you take mobile batteries at scale? How do you simplify it? Let's not make it look real pretty and sexy, right? Let's make it look very unsexy and industrial and make sure that it provides a cost point that makes a lot of sense. You're going to see that coming from Zeem. Again, a little hint in the direction. We're at power plants. So being able to source power, and a lot of it, right, at a good rate, putting it into a battery, mobilizing it to a customer site, that I think is going to be part of how do you move this all faster, right? And then I think the other thing is trying to, move faster through the permitting process, et cetera. It's the above ground infrastructure. So today you're hearing quite a few talk about chargers on skids or some of the utility gear on skids. We are very much down that path. We've been designing stuff. So I said, we don't want to build it, but we go to those who do and say, you should design this and we'll be your best customer. And right now you're going to see some of that innovation reveal itself, possibly by the end of the year. We're literally testing it as we speak today, but those same pieces of equipment that go to power up that concert that you're talking about, we've taken it, done a little bit of modification, and it's been doing DC charging right now. So again, AC, there's a couple of them out there. You've got your Moxians and others, which have had their problems, but they're smaller batteries. I'm talking about max weight over the road, and being able to provide it for fleet. So what you're going to see coming is exciting. I mean, we've been fairly muted and stealth about it, but it's making sure that we have the right people behind this to actually drive it. And most importantly, have a cost factor equivalent to the grid. I say that to you because I've not talked to anybody about this. So you'd be the first, and being able to match what, let's say, public charging is, but mobilizing the power to that customer site, not having to dig up or trench, sounds like a dream, but it's exactly the application we're going to provide, I would say, by first or second quarter 2025.
Exciting times ahead. Paul, what's the future of Zeem?
I mean, the future of Zeem is exactly what I've been sort of dropping a little bit of nuggets on you. It's, okay, there's EV trucking, which is really exciting. There's charging, which is really exciting. There's these major real estate connection points with these massive interconnections. So to me, the future is energy, right? And how do you use energy efficiently? How do we use it for transportation and lower costs, provide a better environment for everybody who operates in that environment? So the future is taking transportation to the next level, the same way we took the cell phone to the next level. Zeem wants to take EV trucking and fleet operations to the next level by providing energy, by providing a platform for information, the same way Google wants to understand what you're buying and what your travel habits are. The same thing is happening right now in transportation. We don't realize it because our Teslas are just doing it anyway. And I think right now, fleets, everybody wants to understand, what is that pattern? Why do they stop at a particular place? How else could they make money from that stop? Those are some of the things that today we want to answer a lot of those questions, and understanding this transformation. If you're going to operate an EV, how does that transform the way you're going to operate your fleet? It's pretty impactful. And I want to be at the cusp of all that.
You're building it, and you're building it financially responsible. I love this, that the future is using energy efficiency. You're right, but then also you're going to gather an immense amount of data. Perhaps you could build another business on that, because when you control the infrastructure, and I'll use the Apple term, you're vertically integrated because you're taking care of the product. It's very interesting what you say about public charging going away. I agree, because it doesn't work, and your solution works, because if I come to your solution, I'm 99.99% guaranteed my car is going to charge. So the future is very bright for Zeem. Paul, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Look, I understand the headwinds of electric vehicles. It's just not true. I personally drive an EV. I have convinced many very conservative people who have started driving Model Y, saying they'd never drive one, and have bought them. I think EV is here to stay. I think the fleet side of things is in its infancy, and it's in a really exciting point. And Zeem is very much driving a lot of that. We're, again, building the plane, or trying to land the plane as we're flying it. And again, we're all in the middle of this process, but it's so early. And Zeem right now is a great example of a massive, in my opinion, massive success story. We're making money out of this site today. We could repeat this throughout the country. So I think that this is the earliest days of EV charging, in the way that infrastructure is going to be rolled out for transportation.
Paul said it correctly. EVs are here to stay. I'm a proud EV owner. I know Paul is as well, and a lot of our listeners are. They're just wonderful, wonderful cars. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is Zeem. Paul, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please kindly rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback is invaluable to us as we work to produce world-class content.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.